Thank you all for joining us for our inaugural SICSS-Howard Mathematica motivational address. I will begin by introducing our speaker. We'll close with a few resources for you to get to know SICSS-Howard Mathematica if you're joining us for the first time. It is my honor to introduce our inaugural SICSS-Howard Mathematica motivational speaker, Paula Moreno. Paula Moreno founded and directs Visible Hands, a nonprofit foundation established to promote social inclusion and peace building in Colombia. Moreno served on the Ford Foundation Board of Trustees. From 2007 to 2010, she served as the Minister of Culture in Colombia, the first Afro-Colombian woman and the youngest person to lead a cabinet-level ministry in the history of the country. In 2010, Moreno was selected by the Council of the Americas as one of the most influential young leaders in the region. The same year, she received the Order of St. Charles for her work in government. In 2011, she was awarded the Order of the Aztec Eagle by Mexico's President Felipe Calderón Hinojosa for contributing to the improvement of Mexico-Colombia relations. She was a Yale World Fellow and has been a Hubert H. Humphrey Fellow for Urban and Regional Studies at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Moreno holds a degree in Italian language and culture from the Italian Institute of Culture and a Bachelor of Science in Industrial Engineering from the Autonomous University of Colombia. Finally, Moreno earned a Master of Philosophy and Management Studies at the University of Cambridge while studying the sustainable use of biodiversity by local communities in Colombia. She has done so much and has so much more to come. I am delighted to introduce Paula Moreno as our inaugural SICSS motivational speaker. Welcome, Paula. The floor is yours.
Hello, my dear friends of Howard University and Mathematica. I'm so honored to be with this group of scholars who are designing the future for many of us. And I'm so honored also to be the first international guest speaker that you have in order to move your agenda forward. I would like just to highlight that we need you, that we need your knowledge, that we need your leadership, that we need you to try to respond to many of the challenges that many of us are facing today. And let me first introduce myself. I'm Paula Moreno. I'm from Colombia. Maybe many of you don't know that we are 10 million Black people in Colombia out of the 150 million people that we are African descent in Latin America and in the Americas as well. So I'm really happy to be here and also to share my perspective as a person who have been working on racial equality for 20 years. I'm 43 now, and I have been working on this really with my full awareness for 20 years. And also working in different spaces, not just in Colombia, not just in Latin America, but also in Europe and in the continent in more than 5 countries. So it is my great honor to be with you today. My perspective in this talk will be about your leadership and my leadership in order to respond to the current challenges that we have. In particular, I frame our conversation on technology. I didn't go straight to data inclusion, and I didn't go straight to other points. I just want to talk to you about the big picture first, the big picture. So any of your research, any of your efforts are framed in a more strategic way. I think I'm not an expert in technology. For me, this has been a challenge to prepare this presentation because I'm not an expert in technology, but I have learned working from the grassroots to the grass tops, how important it is to have this conversation with you today, to learn from you. And with the organizers, I really emphasize that I want to have a direct conversation with you. I will share some ideas and perspective. I basically will focus on 3 or 4 things. I want to analyze with you trends. I want to talk about the current situation of African descent and racial equality in the world. I also want to share my experience from Colombia. And also I want to challenge your leadership. I want to talk about not just your academic record or your academic expertise, but your leadership. What is your academic leadership? And what kind of academic leadership we need from you. And so I entitled this conversation, The New Doors of Return, because I think that history is with us, as James Baldwin always repeat, history is with us, it's alive in us, it's in everything we do. But how we build the future, how we open the future, how we design the future, when many other people are designing our future. I think that's why I chose this title, because I think technology, data analysis, everything that you are doing is really, or can be really, a new door of return in a contemporary way for all of us, African descents in the world. And so I want to talk about trends, I want to talk about different things, but particularly frame in technology, inequality, and the African diaspora. So I just would like to follow by saying, and using this quote of Fellow Insar, a great scholar, Senegalese scholar, who is now in the University of North Carolina and who wrote this great book, Afrotopia, that I highly recommend to you. He said, the future is open, that she remains open to all of us. And that it is the task of African, and I would say Afro-descendants, to think and formulate their own future and to find their own metaphors for it. Now it's about to dream this utopia in Africa itself, to dream this, to design Africa ourselves, to think and to act for ourselves. And I really, when I was thinking about and reading about all the work you're convening and this working group, I was thinking about that. I was thinking, what is the utopia of this group? What is the utopia of this group of academic researchers, PhD, thinking, dreaming? Yeah, because sometimes, yeah, we need to analyze the current reality, but we almost half of the time need to spend time designing the future, because our people are designing our future. And in general, for Afro-descendants, I think that violence and trauma and so many other things just distract us from the task that we have ahead. And it's on purpose to create this violence and this drama, so we cannot look to the horizon and look ahead. So you as scholars, what is the future that you are thinking, designing? What are these metaphors of futures that we are building through your research? That would be my first reflection. And the key questions that I want to address is, where are we in the main trends that will define and mold the future? And I would like to mention some 10 trends that everyone is talking about in technology about the future. Who is programming us? Who is designing the algorithms? And also, in line with your work, who is analyzing our data to make decisions and design our future? So these are my quick questions. So in that regard, I just want to move forward to our next slide and say, okay, we are in a critical moment. I think many of you and me, we feel that we have made progress, because I always said in Colombia and in Latin America, in Brazil and the places that I work, that we have made progress because we haven't stopped working. And we haven't stopped working nationally, transnationally, inspiring, writing, creating knowledge, and being in solidarity for each other as African descent. We haven't stopped working. That's why we have made progress. It's not because it's not a random thing. But since this moment and the pandemics and everything make us all feel that the world is coming to an end. No, it's kind of, but and that's why I use this title, The New Doors of Return, because it has ended for us many times. For Black and Afro descendants, it has just ended many times. And this is one of the critical moments that we are facing, that in terms of democracy, many of the achievements that we have had in racial equality are, under attack. In terms of all these massacres that we are suffering in the US, but even in the violence here in Colombia now that has been increasing, and in Brazil, in the favelas, in so many ways, the world is ending for us. So our great challenge, you as scholars or me as a leader who have a welfare state to a major extent is how we design the future, despite all the things that are happening to us right now. How we really can create these metaphors of the future. And I was just looking for trends, and since the pandemic accelerates so many technological changes and was so crucial technology in the pandemic, I was analyzing the general trends for 2030 of the most powerful technologies that will shape just our society. You can read, you know more than me, but in all these trends, I was thinking how we cross these trends with the information that we have about our people. How do we prepare? What is our agenda? Because all these trends, 3D printing, internet, robotics, quantum, many are today in place, but they are accelerating our times and also increasing our exclusions, increasing our inequalities. So how are we in these 10 trends? That would be my first question and the first point of our conversation. And so, and in particularly, two of these trends, when I was analyzing and learning, because I'm really concerned in my leadership, how I really anticipate in the future, because I feel that many other people are planning our future and we are not planning our future because we are dealing day to day with this drama, with this discrimination, with so many things. And I was analyzing, and the main trend that caught my attention was that blockchain technology and Web3 will disrupt art, music, and game and entertainment, creator economy, business, social media, everything. So how are we preparing for that? As we will see now when we analyze the trends of the African diaspora globally, how we prepare for that in a global way, thinking us as global entities and transnational partners, even if we have this double citizenship from our countries. In your cases, most of you who are African American, in my case, I'm Afro-Colombian, yeah, but we have this double citizenship of being from one country, but also this transnational citizenship to be African descent. And in many of the things like culture, we are in the key point of the global scenario, and many of these technology will change our participation in that. So in all these trends, where are we? What are we thinking? Why are we getting prepared for the future? That would be my main question. So, and then I would like to move to analyze that, because we have been in this pandemic of pandemics where everything just, I said that all the dirty that was in the water just came out, and we just need to deal with all this rubbish and everything that we have in the different societies. And we are also getting prepared for all this acceleration of climate change and the climate crisis, and everything is coming together. So how are we seeing ourselves and designing ourselves from this technological revolution that was in place, but that is accelerating? How are we seeing ourselves in that regard? So then I want to move to the second point, and it's the African diaspora. And how are we sometimes we don't see ourselves as a global power. And I want to talk about that because we create Invisible Hands. I'm the president of a foundation in Colombia, Manos Visibles, Visible Hands. And we have been analyzing that for more than 6 years. And the first thing was saying, okay, if we are a global power, okay, let's talk about the numbers. And many of you that make this data analysis, we need more information about our global power. Not just our national power, because we have been, in particularly in the Americas and in other places, just recently in Argentina, we are included in the census. Like racial identity is included in the census. In many Latin American countries has been a fight, but how we manage our global data. So first to say we are 1,500 million people in this world. That's the number that we have from the African Union. And from this 1,500, we're 1,200 in the continent and 300 million in the diaspora. No, with difficult historical and racial origins, differences, and similarities. So since Africa comes with us in so many ways, we, in different places and in the diaspora, we also refer to slavery, on enslaved. And since Africa comes with us, how it comes with us, not just in the past, but in the future. I think that's one of the critical points. And what does it mean to be one of the main diaspora? We know we are in the top diasporas in the world. What does it mean for us in terms of power? How we define our power in technological terms, how we create the information and the data that can allow us to work together in a more effective way. In terms of communications, in terms of contents, in terms of political will, so many things. How do we anticipate, build, invent our own technological future? And I here want to emphasize, particularly calling the attention in terms of the research that all of you are making and undertaking, and the usefulness of this research. It's so important always to have a systemic approach. And what do I talk about systemic? Because it comes from the rights and the advocacy strategy to create access to technology, to quality training, to education. And also from pilots where all these findings can be used to change the patterns, to change the reality, and make it possible for us to really posit solutions in these critical times. I think that's key, and I just wanted to just emphasize that. So, and I just wanted to show you some of these slides. I will share with you the report that we built in 2019, and of course, I think we need current data, no? The world has changed dramatically in these last 3 years since we published this. But so we need more data to make more global understanding of the African diaspora and leverage our power. So I just wanted to show you numbers, because sometimes when we are talking about these 300 million people outside the continent, we're talking that Colombia is the third country with the largest African diaspora. The first one is Brazil, then the United States, Colombia, and there we go with all these countries where we have an important presence. And I think to have that map is critical in terms of building our strategy for being more influential in the world. I want to show another slide to you, also to deepen down. We make a study, and then we also not just analyze the demographic of the African diaspora, as I showed you in the previous slide, but also we really wanted to see how was the level of organization of the African diaspora. What were the kind of organizations that have been created, particularly since the Black Power movement. Of course, the US have played a global role for us to organize. Also, these African leaders like Nkrumah and Thomas Sankara, and all these Pan-Africanists, Marcus Garvey, all these people who really thought about this sense of the reunion of this new Africa after slavery. And so we analyzed more than 1,000 organizations, and seeing the organization that work for the African diaspora, we found that the main areas of interest were culture, human rights, education, and I would highlight human rights because I think we have made a lot of progress in terms of legal rights for African descents all over the place. And in culture, of course, we are a cultural giant, and it is very important for us to keep connected and reflect these influences that we globally have had with the continent and the African diaspora. But the main organization was culture, human rights. But when it comes to technology, we didn't find many organizations working on technology and innovation. And even for this talk, I was just looking for different organizations, and I found a few. You know, when you Google and look African diaspora and technology, or African diaspora and data inclusion, or African, you don't find many organizations dealing with that. I think that's key, that we increase even to the levels of education or culture, more organization like this network that can give globally guidelines for our advocacy in terms of technology and for being up to date and anticipate the future. I think that's critical. And looking at the landscape of organization that we are, certainly the pandemic helped us to create even more organization. All of us just came to the social networks and interact much more to create these global networks because virtuality facilitate even having more that interaction, and new organizations emerge. We calculate that even double down during the pandemic, the organizations for the African diaspora. So, and it's very interesting because of course, the US keep being a key point for all of us, a key power center for the African diaspora, and Latin America, and of course the continent, and then Europe as a major source for our institutional strengthening. So, and we were looking in which country we have the organization just to show you the trends. But even these trends are growing. As I mentioned, the case of Argentina now, there was a country in complete denial of the African diaspora presence in their country. Now it's growing. They just passed a law. They will be visible in the census, and many new organizations are emerging. So I just wanted to show this Afro-Latino power and this US power, apart from the continent, that of course is our powerhouse. And one of my analyses there, and I just wanted to show you when we analyze when these organizations were created, and you could see, I mean, the civil rights movements and all these African governments who shaped the power, who shaped and talk about this Pan-Africanism and everything, how just organization emerged in these last 5 decades and have been growing since then. So the point is, where is our next step as creating this organization that would highlight and draft the agenda for the African diaspora? And I think in particular, your network have a very critical role to be an organization visible that brings data information, but also proposals for changing inequality in technology and so many other ways for the African diaspora. So, so then I just wanted to be very specific after analyzing some of these trends, not just of technology and where are we there, who is planning us, who is programming us, who makes the algorithms. We are not there. You have made a lot of analysis about the leadership in the tech industry and many other industries that are shaping our future. And we know we don't have many Black people there. And you have made, and I have been reading and listening to different podcasts about this new gene code, that definitely shaped the future of African descents and this level of stagnation, even if we have the exception, like my case or your cases as PhDs, we keep being exceptions to the rule of leadership and power, and our communities as a mass are now increasing the level of welfare that our communities deserve. And I just want to emphasize that these new doors of return, particularly in this pandemic that we would like to think about post-pandemic, but it's still pandemic, but we are just going out and living our lives, trying to survive. I think now it's a time and I would like to emphasize from one of my roles as president of one of the programmatic committees at Ford Foundation. I'm the president of one of the social justice programmatic committees. We have two to design the programmatic approach of the foundation. And recently we published a great reflection led by Darren Walker that I highly recommend to you. Read him and listen to him, great leader. And Darren has been emphasizing this approach from recovery to reimagination. How are we reimagining the future? Because everything changed, the future of work, the future of education, the future of everything changed. And how is the African diaspora thinking these new doors of return in this new logic of reimagination, not just what already exists that we know it doesn't work in many ways, it doesn't work for us. So how we make things work for us, given the spaces that we have now, that maybe 100 years ago we didn't, I wouldn't be having this conversation with you, and you wouldn't be this strong network that we have now. So given that this agency that we have as a leaders, how are we thinking this, not just the recovery of our and the diagnosis of our communities, but also the reimagine our place and our power, our spaces in the world. And for that, we need first an agenda, very clear agenda. And when I was looking to your website, I think conversations, I emphasize that with I have been in many networks of leaders from ASWA, the African Association of the African Diaspora, for the African Diaspora. I have been in the council for 15 years. And I think we need to come not just to listening and analyzing and overanalyzing what we know exists, and we need to repeat that exists and is unfair, but we need to come to agendas. What can we do? And be very specific in that. How much do we need? You know, so not just to express, but really to develop this sense of agency in this particular topic, I think is part of the task of this group. And this agenda will be critical. Second, the narrative building and awareness, because the pandemic changed a lot the landscape for African descents in technology, in inequality. So, and racism, but how we make this not just American narrative, but a global narrative that we can share as Afro-Latino, that we can share as Africans, how we can build this global narrative. Because sometimes I feel that it's very US-centric, the narrative, but we need to integrate a more global narrative and real global narrative. And then what is our next phase of racial equality? What are we envisioning? And when I was making that balance, I was saying, I think we all of us have learned, not just in the US, but in Colombia and everywhere, that it's not just representation. I mean, I was the first Black minister in Colombia, the first Black woman to be a minister in Colombia. And even in the last 100 years, I was the first one Black entity out in a country that has 50 million inhabitants, and we are 10 million. I was the first one. So yeah, and I tried to address and perform power in the best way, and I was rated as one of the best ministers in that moment. But passing the years, we have learned that it's not just representation, that we need effective power and powers, not just one. It's not just political power that is very critical, but the economic power that shapes political power, the technological power. What are the powers that we need? The communication powers, the moving image power, so many things. So it's not just the political, and I think we need to open up thinking about what is the power that you are building in the world that go beyond representation, that go beyond, and that comes for systemic change. I think that's key. Also recognizing the last 20 years, we have gained academic power, representation power, but in some way it's not enough. So what is the next level that we are thinking about? And how are also, given the reality of the pandemic and the acceleration of empowerment for our community, impoverishment of our communities and inequality, what are we going to do to really tackle that right now? No, I think these 3 points are key, and I would like to reflect that with you. So, and technology has been one of these doors that have been closed to us, and I will show you the case of Colombia. For many, and I was in Brazil 2 months ago, I mean, it's not very different. Technology has not been an open door for us. It has been closed. So how are we going to open that technology, this information society, really to our communities? Because we have been, you know, we now know that the increase of educational inequality, sorry, and the capital challenges that we have, because we need assets. Technology is not cheap. It's not just something that you just yeah, you can make a movie from your mobile phone, but really to become a player globally, it requires a lot. So, and also the systems approach, because the connectivity, and you will see, and that's why I really emphasize your analysis in that in terms of advocacy. The private sector funds that have been created, but how they benefit really our community and create sustainable change. How we exchange in this regard, no? How we reflect together, because I think the landscape in racial equality and in the landscape of discrimination in these last 3 years has been worse. So how are we seeing that? How are we mapping that? How are we creating an agenda for that? I think that's part of our task. So I wanted to show you a particular, and that's my third and final point, is I wanted to talk to you about Colombia, because I live in Colombia. I'm now in Colombia, in Bogota. And we are the third country in Latin America, in the Americas, with the largest Afro-descendant population. And in Latin America, you see we have a complete level of disparity in terms of ICT. You know, in Colombia now, in the pandemic, when we were all isolated and kids depend in their education from technology, part of the numbers that we were facing were that in general in Colombian households, we have 50% of the population, the Colombian population, have access to internet. And in particularly in areas that are 90% African descent, like the Pacific coast in Colombia, that you know is 90% African descent, we don't even have access. We have 3% of access to connectivity. How that's translated in reality is that many of our young people, children, didn't go to school in 2 years, didn't participate in the educational system in 2 years. And many of them were recruited by guerrilla, paramilitaries, and criminal structures during that time. So to have access to computer, in general, Colombians, 40% of Colombia have access to computers. From all the leadership that we have, I just know 2 people in the tech industry. The head of Hewlett Packard, who is a visible hand, is the only Black woman leading a business, transnational business in Colombia. And so we have so many inequalities, but just to give you an example of a particular case in Colombia, we know many of our kids drop school. We know many of our kids in large criminal groups. We know many of our kids have been killed in that process. And that's also because of this systemic situation. Now, we don't have access to connectivity in major Afro-descendant neighborhoods, regions, everything. We don't have access to the equipment, and technology is not cheap. For a Black person in Colombia to buy a computer is a major challenge. So that's the reality I want you to connect with, because sometimes if we're there in the academy, and I have had the great pleasure to be a fellow in so many great US universities, but sometimes you disconnect and consider that your condition are the conditions of almost everybody. But then to realize that in many places, and I wanted to show you one of the programs that we are developing in Manos Visibles, that is our Acai Valley, or you talk about the Silicon Valley, but we talk at Naidi Valley, that is acai, and it's a fruit of the Pacific coast. How we bring technology to Timbiqui, and this is a picture of one of the Black neighborhoods that could be not just Timbiqui, could be Maputo in Mozambique, or it could be other places, you know, in Bahia, in Salvador, in some of the places in Brazil. So how we bring that, how we create a reality where many of these places where there is no connectivity and there is no a technological understanding and capacity building, then we bring there and we create a sense of agency in ourselves to make that possible, because when the next pandemic comes, then our community will be just you know, in the worst scenario. So how we are very specific in the realities that we want to change. I think that's my call for you in your research. Yeah. And and in Timbiki, we have that, you know, our kids were just went to school, and they don't have 9 out of 10 didn't have access to internet. They didn't have laptop. The speed of the connection was just made very critical to develop any kind of virtual work. So that's the reality of, I would say, a major part of the African diaspora. What can we do? Because we can talk about data analysis, we can talk about so many things, but how do we change these systemic things that also are connected to the violence that we are facing? And the violence, not because, yeah, we know the social networks are helping to promote extremism and so many things, but at the same time, we are not present as we should in all these landscape to try to counter, kind of balance this crisis that we are facing. So we created a whole program, and I just will share a video with you to try to bring teachers to work and analyze and be trained for that, because our teachers were not prepared. We also talk with private sector, that I will emphasize the importance to work with the private sector and say, okay, you need developers, you need all of these, but how can you help us to improve the situation in these places so we can train and make this an option for employment for our people? With women, because of course, you and me, we all know that even when we come with the racial and the gender lens, it's even worse. So how can we really create an ecosystem that facilitates that many of these communities that have even left behind the place that they were in 2019, that was very critical, can really come with an opportunity, with a future in this global crisis that we are facing now. And we create as well a school of robotics, for instance, in some of these municipalities.
El desafío tecnológico en Timbiquí, Cauca. 1 de cada 10 habitantes tiene menos de 25 años. 9 de cada 10 estudiantes no tiene acceso a Internet. De 300 jóvenes que terminan el grado 11, solo 4 ingresan a educación superior. Para cambiar esas cifras, la corporación Manos Visibles, Red Nose Day y la Universidad Autónoma de Occidente unieron esfuerzos y becaron a 3 jóvenes talentos de Timbiquí, quienes desde este semestre están estudiando en un programa de la Facultad de Ingeniería de la UAU.
El proceso de las becas fueron como unos cursos que estaban dando en pensamiento computacional y algoritmo y pensamiento computacional y robótica, que estaba ofreciendo Manos Visibles, ¿ya? Entonces, para nosotros que estábamos en 11, en la institución educativa agrícola Justinano Coro en Timbiquí, Cauca, nos dieron una charla sobre que iba a haber esos cursos. Ingresamos, empezamos a estudiar una que otra cosa, participamos de una competencia llamada RoboJam México y pues quedamos en segundo lugar, gracias a Dios, y pues eso nos llevó un poco más a ser postulados a las becas, y también porque teníamos un excelente desempeño en el estudio del curso que estuvimos durante ese tiempo.
Cuando terminé el curso, pues me enteré, me llamaron, de hecho estaba por acá en Cali, andé a las excursiones y me dijeron que te ganaste una beca con personas visibles. No, la verdad que no lo podía creer, algo impresionante. Como de tantas personas que habíamos en el curso, llegué a ser yo justamente la merecedora de la beca. Entonces, sorprendida y sin palabras.
Obtener una beca por nuestro esfuerzo, la verdad es algo, desde mi punto de vista, increíble. Jamás pensé que yo iba a obtener una beca por medio de esta fundación, y más en esta universidad. He visto compañeros en el municipio que han terminado el bachillerato y se han quedado en el pueblo, o han venido a Cali y no han podido estudiar, o en ocasiones entran a universidades y pues que no les gusta y todo eso. Bueno, pues yo me siento recontento al estar acá, porque este es un privilegio que no tiene todo el mundo, la verdad, entrar a una universidad como la Autónoma, y por eso le agradezco mucho a las personas que nos apoyaron y que confían en nosotros, en que sacaremos nuestra carrera adelante como unos verdaderos profesionales. Totalmente agradecido por esta oportunidad que nos dan de poder estudiar lo que nosotros realmente queremos. Y pues la verdad yo podría decir que si una persona me preguntaría qué tiene la Universidad Autónoma, yo le diría, no pregunte así, más bien diga qué no tiene la universidad para ofrecerte a ti para tener un mejor aprendizaje.
So, and these are examples. I just want to pass very quickly and just, yeah, we can come next. And so, my dear friends, it has been for me a great pleasure to have this conversation with you, to call you for action. We need you, we need you. We need this call to action, and we need you in this task. But we need you with a global perspective. We need you with a system perspective. I would like you to tell me, what is your purpose and what are you trying to change, given the data analysis that you have made, given the systemic analysis that you have made? What do you want to change and contribute to this racial equality that passes through your area of research from a more systemic way? And I want you to tell me that in terms of an agenda, an action narrative that any of us can understand. In terms of advocacy, because Howard is in Washington, now we are all over the world, but it's in Washington, DC, where, you know, in the case of Colombia, we have really worked with the Congressional Black Caucus to move the agenda in so many critical things for the African diaspora in Colombia and in Brazil. And we can shape agenda from Washington, DC, no doubt, with the private sector that now is creating all these funds for racial equality and diversity policies in the private sector. But what are we expecting, apart from individuals to be in leadership positions, to a more systemic approach, change approach, and open opportunities for all these masses of Black people who have been impoverished and out of technology in this pandemic? So how are we seeing that? How can also we work with Howard University or your universities, because I know you are in networks, to partner with philanthropy or organizations like Visible Hands to develop pilot projects to try to start shaping the future? I mean, with philanthropy, we really can work hand in hand with you to make your ideas practical and in the current context. And also exchanges. I would love to have any of you working with us here in Colombia. And I know many foundations will be so happy to have you. So you have the global experience that you need to be part of this global power that we need to perform in the future in a more intentional way in different areas, not just the politic or the diplomatic, but in technology, in filmmaking, in so many other things. So thank you very much for this invitation. And please write to me through Instagram or any social media. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us and inspiring all of us. What a wonderful way to spend an evening. Just drawing so much just inspiration and motivation from your words, and just greatly appreciate your taking the time to motivate our students here at the SICSS-Howard Mathematica site. But I also know that there are SICSS students on the continent, in Cameroon, in Nigeria and South Africa that are watching, as well as my SICSS colleagues all over the world. Thank you so much for all that you do, and we'll be watching your career. We're so excited to see everything that comes next for Visible Hands and for all of the endeavors that you decide to invest your energy and just your brilliance in. Thank you so much, Paula. Thank you all for watching. For more information on SICSS-Howard Mathematica, visit our website, follow us on social media, and join our email list.